Welcome everyone, my name is Monica Burke, and I'm a grassroots organizer with Voter Choice Massachusetts, and both their Metro West and their Greater Lowell chapters. And I'm also a former Indivisible leader. Is anybody here in a grassroots group like Indivisible or Our Revolution or anything? Raise your hand. Wow, awesome. Anybody who's not in a grassroots group? We got one hand. Well, guess what, honey? You're joining the group today. All right, so I'm so excited to be here with you today. Thank you all for coming out in the snow. It wasn't too bad getting here, right? Not too bad. All right, so we're going to talk about saving democracy today. Does that sound good? All right. So today I will be one of two moderators. The other moderator is the amazing Margaret Scarsdale of Indivisible Neshoba. Put your hands together for Margaret. So Margaret's going to MC the latter part of the town hall today. It's a dual purpose kind of a town hall. We're going to talk about ranked choice voting for a little over an hour, and then we're going to talk with our Congresswoman, Lori Trahan, assuming she can get here in the snow, specifically 2:15 to 3. She does need to leave promptly at 3 o'clock. So basically, I would like to thank a lot of the groups who put work into throwing this shindig together. There's about 14 different groups. So if you're in one of the following groups, could you please stand up? The groups that I'm going to name first are the ones that were financially responsible for like booking the room and stuff like that. So that's really important. Our Revolution Concord, can you please stand up? Indivisible Neshoba, Indivisible Acton, and Indivisible Greater Andover Indivisible. All right, so thank you guys so much for doing that. And then there was a whole mess of other groups that helped with like the manpower to set up the chairs and snacks and drinks and stuff. So if you are in any of the other groups, we really appreciate all your help. The Active Democratic Town Committee, Boxborough, Concord, and Westford Democratic Town Committees, as well as the Concord Progressive Activist Afternoons, Carlisle Rising to Action, Greater Haverhill Indivisible, Indivisible Westford, a chapter of Progressive Mass, Progressive Dents of Lowell, and Solidarity Lowell. So thank you all for helping out with that. So I wanted to also let you know that today's event will be filmed. You can see Sam in the back. Sam, give us a big wave. Hey, Sam. Sam's brother Christian's here. Christian, how you doing? Christian just ran for office. Thank you, Christian and Sam, for coming. So yeah, so you can go on the Concord Carlisle TV website. Is that right? And the YouTube, maybe?
Yeah, Media Network.
Okay, awesome. And you can see a filming of today's event, and you can share that with your friends who weren't able to make it. Now I'd like to introduce you to the company that our keynote speaker, Adam Friedman, and I work at. It's called Voter Choice Massachusetts, and it's a nonpartisan, politically diverse company that is a nonprofit, and it's an organization that's dedicated to educating the Massachusetts public about electoral reforms that will increase the range of choice on the ballot and produce fairer outcomes. So Voter Choice Massachusetts advocates for ranked choice voting, which allows voters to rank their candidates on the ballot in order of their preference. Ranked choice voting would make Massachusetts elections more competitive and fair by encouraging the participation of more candidates and more parties, and ensuring outcomes that more accurately reflect the will of the voters. How does that sound? Good? Yeah. Next, it is my honor to introduce you to Adam Friedman. He's our executive director at Voter Choice Massachusetts, which is the nation's largest grassroots organization working to advance ranked choice voting. So we have the largest organization in Massachusetts advancing ranked choice voting in the whole country. He serves on the boards of Mass Vote and Common Cause Massachusetts, and he's been involved in lobbying and organizing around a variety of voting and democracy reforms over the past 10 years. He works full-time as a civic technologist and web software engineer, and beginning in 2012, he created the first searchable public database of official election statistics on behalf of the Secretary of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts and 3 other United States. He holds a bachelor's in history from BU, and I'm thrilled to turn it over to Adam right after I ask you all, right after I ask you all to please turn off your phones or mute them or put them in airplane mode. Thank you. Here you go.
So she said I work as a full-time civic technologist.
It's not really true anymore. I work as a full-time organizer to try to win ranked choice voting in Massachusetts and make us the second state in U.S. history to go full statewide ranked choice voting. How does that sound, everybody? It's not going to be easy, but it's going to be fun, and it's going to be impactful. So raise your hand if you know about Maine. Awesome. Raise your hand if you're pretty familiar with ranked choice voting already. Raise your hand if you've seen one of our 20-minute slideshow talks already. I was afraid of this moment. Okay. That's not too bad. It's about a quarter of the room. So you quarter will have to suffer through this, or just be, thoroughly re-enlightened. Okay, so I'll do the best I can to go over the boring parts quickly. Raise your hand if you want to get a look at these databases that I've created of election results statistics for states around the country. Okay, I wasn't sure if it's super boring or it's fun. Okay, so let me go over to the computer and I'll quickly call that up and show everybody how you can access that yourselves. All right. Yep. Okay, so I was actually I was a nerdy little web developer working for the Boston Herald. I was one of their web development staff. I did get one piece published in the Herald, actually an op-ed on ranked choice voting, about a horribly low turnout preliminary election in Boston. It was a 7% turnout. And I calculated in that op-ed that I think is floating around somewhere. I think the number was, it cost the city of Boston $37 per ballot, per voter, to have them turn out, given the low turnout. And I created this database that is, you can access at electionstats.state.ma.us. I created this because I wanted to find out how many elections occurred in the state where the winner did not have a majority, did not have a 50% majority mandate, which seems like a common sense baseline to have the right to govern, right? And it turned out that the numbers are quite high in terms of folks who don't achieve that threshold. And so you can go to this site anytime and access the full history of our elections back to 1970s. There's about 50 years of data in here. Oh, here's an interesting contest. I just happened to stumble upon it. There's all sorts of interesting insights that we can get about our democracy. Once we have the data, we get kind of a reality check on how we need to proceed and fix things to make it more democratic, to give voters a voice, to give voters more choice. And so this system is set up in Virginia, Vermont, and New Hampshire thus far. And it was a nifty little business. It's a for-profit business, but it's also mission-based. And it's an exciting thing to do, to liberate all this data. But then something truly disruptive and exciting came upon my lap, and that was the miraculous, visionary achievement in Maine to be the first state ever in U.S. history to allow voters to vote honestly, without fear they're throwing their vote away, without sending someone into office who really shouldn't have won, given the majority wanted to go in a different direction. And that's what we're talking about today. So raise your hand if you've ever wanted to vote for someone, but you thought that voting for them means you're throwing your vote away. Here we are. Raise your hand if you wanted to support a front runner, but you were worried that there was someone else in the race that would flip, steal votes from them, siphon votes from them, and flip the result to someone you really didn't want to win. Okay. So right there, ranked choice voting is something that gives something to every kind of voter. It's not just for people who want to vote for marginal fringe candidates, right? It protects voters who want to vote for front runners as well. It protects candidates who want to run and have their ideas heard. It protects fresh ideas and new voices to enter the system, and it also protects folks who are more established so that they're not going to get thwarted just because there's someone that's similar. So it's actually something for everyone, and the net result is that we have a much richer debate. We do eventually get different outcomes. We don't constantly have narrow choices cycle after cycle after cycle. Does that sound pretty good to folks? All right, there's probably a lot of other benefits that I'm not articulating that well, but let's jump into the talk, and maybe during Q&A you guys can help fill in those blanks here. So we'll run through this, the problem, the solution, some research talking about the benefits of ranked choice voting, and then some more details about where we are right now in our campaign to win it in Massachusetts. All right, so Monica already read all this, so I'll skip that. This is the textbook example that a lot of folks see right away. The visceral pain that was felt around the country. I don't think I need this mic. Do I need this mic? I don't know. All right, I'll use the mic. All right. Bush, Gore, Nader. Very close election. Very, very close. Hair's breadth. 537 vote difference between the Republican and the Democrat in Florida, 2000 for president. Here's Nader pulling in almost 100,000 votes. And we know with exit polls that a plurality of those Nader voters would have voted for Gore had Nader not been in the race. This is the data that shows what we intuitively know. And then we have this term that we call Nader, this pejorative called spoiler. And so we slap this label on folks who should have the right to run. Everybody should have the right to run in our democracy, right? But they get demonized. So this was his moment where he transitioned from a consumer advocate that was celebrated by everyone around the country to one of the most vilified political figures in recent memory, just because he wanted to run and he refused to drop out. So he's not only what we call a spoiler, we also call this type of person in this scenario a kingmaker, where if Nader stays in the race, he serves to threaten the ability for Gore to win because he has an overlapping base of support. And if he decides to drop out, he allows Gore to consolidate most or all of that base and win the election. So the term for that in academic terminology is called the kingmaker dilemma or the kingmaker scenario, where we give the least popular candidate the ultimate power to essentially decide who wins the most powerful office in the United States. Now, does that make sense? No. But our system allows that every time. So that was kind of the classic spoiler dilemma. Here's a crowded field dilemma. You have 14 candidates in the Republican primary for president. There's a particular person in the bottom right corner you might recognize very well. There's all these other choices. How many votes do you get as a voter in this scenario? One. 14 choices, one vote. So if you really don't like the person in the bottom right corner, but you know he has a really passionate base that will stay together, how do you cast a vote that counts? That really, you can vote for someone you honestly like, but someone who's viable and who can win. And this is a situation where Trump was able to garner early victories in those primaries to the tune of 25 to 35%, winning with with that number. Very low plurality wins. In this scenario is where someone like Donald Trump can thrive and actually win, which is counterintuitive if the majority of those Republican voters actually didn't like him at all. The Washington Post talks about that. The giant field of candidates meant that votes in the early primaries were split widely, making it hard for anyone to cobble together a majority. And we all know the result of this primitive, dysfunctional system. And then back to the general election after that Republican and Democratic primary. We have the usual tropes, the usual headlines, blaming the third-party candidates who want to bring their ideas to the public stage, share their vision for how to move the country forward. Voters who want to vote for them are pressured not to do so. Jill Stein, this third one, Clinton supporters furious with Green Party leader. She took votes from Hillary. A news headline that's saying that a candidate literally took votes from another candidate, which is technically not true, but incredibly pejorative. And so now we have, the folks who want to run have the reputation they have. Here's a primary situation. So a lot of folks say, well, the parties are never going to go for this, like the major parties, because it allows third-party candidates to run. Actually, this is good for parties, too. When you use something like ranked choice voting to ensure that a party gets its majority winner, you allow that party to find its soul, rather than to have a weakened result because of vote splitting. So here, Martha Coakley had run for U.S. Senate in 2010 and had lost to Scott Brown. So then now she's running for governor in 2014, and you have some breakaway candidates and voters that support them getting into the race, like Steve Grossman and Don Berwick. And if you look at those numbers, it implies that there's maybe a majority of folks who want to turn in another direction or are a little bit nervous. Does Coakley have the goods to win against Baker in the general? So it's not a pleasant political calculus, but it's there, and it's reflected in what happened here. Now, with ranked choice voting, maybe she would have won that majority, or maybe someone else would have won. But whoever wins has a strong mandate from the party. They get over 50%. They mobilize more volunteers. They create more excitement and enthusiasm because it's a sure pick, and it shows unity. So that's important for any political party. So that's a good thing. This may be why, these arguments are maybe why 2 years ago we successfully advocated in the Democratic Party convention and got the party to put ranked choice voting onto the official platform of the party in the state. But here's the scenario, and we don't have exit polls, but we sure have anecdotal evidence to show that Berwick and Grossman supporters had an affinity. And that third quote, Coakley, well, the second and third, frightened about Coakley's chances that they went another direction, but voters did not have the ability to rank multiple candidates. They only could choose one, and the result was what it was. Coakley did win, but then she lost to Baker in the general. Now, going down to a local election, 2013, this is another crowded field scenario, but now we're looking at some racial dynamics potentially, neighborhood dynamics potentially. And 2013 was the first year that Boston was a people of color majority city, and you had a great diverse array of candidates in the pool. But what happened here? So similar to what just happened in Chicago, where you had 14 candidates running for mayor in a 2-round runoff system, New York Times just covered this a couple days ago, you had so many candidates here running in that preliminary election, vying for top 2 spots, and then go on to a top 2 final election. All of our cities used that system. You had 2 white Irishmen winning with 35% combined vote. So what percentage of Boston voters who turned out for that preliminary did not choose them? Very good, 65%. 65%. So that's just the math of it, is something wrong there. But what happened here? You had candidates of color from communities of common interest, Black and Latino candidates, getting in the same race, potentially splitting up the vote from those voters. And this isn't our hypothesis. The bottom left corner candidate, Charlotte Golar-Ritchie, was the front-running candidate of color. Her supporters were found out by the Globe, getting together and thinking, how do we get another Black or Latino candidate to drop out? And the columnist here, Derek Jackson, called this, you're trying to racially gerrymander the campaign. Those are pretty intense. It's a pretty intense charge. And the same thing happened, you may recall, the Suffolk District Attorney race, where it was Evandro Carvalho, Linda Champion, Terry McAuliffe, and Rachel Rollins. She was strong enough to overcome the scourge of vote splitting, although Rollins did not have that crucial majority. So she's trying to do some potentially visionary things in the office. Could her detractors say, you actually didn't have 50% of the city, of the district? That may be a problem for her. So we want a system that ensures that whoever's in that office, everyone has 100% confidence that they're there for the right reasons, and they're there because the majority wants them. And not only is it bad for candidates to not get pressured to drop out in our system, but for folks from historically disenfranchised backgrounds, it's the opposite of what we need to be doing in the 21st century in our politics today. And so we still have the residues of a primitive system that creates these dynamics, a zero-sum mentality where the community is pitted against one another rather than working cooperatively. And we're going to see how ranked choice voting flips the script on these incentives, changes the behavior of campaigns and candidates themselves to actually have candidates that are positive, that are visionary and constructive, and where candidates are not knocking each other down, but actually saying, maybe you want this person as their first choice, put me as your second because I'm similar in some way, and we share something that's good for the common interest. Okay. Not much needs to be said about this scenario, I think. I think we get the point. Now, do we get the point? What percentage of voters did not vote for the person who won this primary? 78-ish, 78-some percent. So now back to my database work. So because of being able to release all this data, we can now analyze it, and we see that this is a systemic problem that's been going on for quite a long time in this state. So Massachusetts has a dual problem. On the one hand, we actually have pretty low competition for state house office. And I like to ask folks this. Raise your hand if you can guess, according to all 50 states, where we lie in terms of competitiveness for state house seats, for state legislative office. Why are you laughing? It's not a joke, it's just a simple question. Yeah. Any other guesses? 49th. A little more generous. That's it? Wow, you guys know your stuff. Yeah, we are dead last. Well, we actually swap between 49th and 50th year to year. But so you're both right. Everyone's a winner. Good job. So that's one problem, is we have anemic competition for most offices. But when there is competition, when we have 3 or more candidates, and it usually comes up in these open seat scenarios, where someone dies, resigns, gets thrown in jail, etc., we have incredibly high rates where people are winning without a majority, which is symptomatic of what we're talking about, of spoilers and crowded field scenarios. Look at the numbers for district attorney. 86% of 3 or more candidate races for DA in the last 20 years result in someone who doesn't have that crucial mandate. This just gives people a break from all the charts and graphs and tables and things. So this is our ritual as a country. This is an American pastime, right? We go after voters who want to vote their heart, who want to vote for someone who reflects their values, who may just happen to overlap with someone who's more viable against someone we hate and we don't want to win. We blame those voters. We blame those candidates who want to participate and add richness and flavor and new vision and creative ideas to the debate. But it's the system that's spoiled. It's the system that's the spoiler. So we all have to retrain our brains not to do the usual horse race and politics of division and demonization and cult of personality, and think a little bit deeper. That we can be doing, in Massachusetts, we're the second most educated state in the United States. So we solve problems. We innovate. We're policy leaders, healthcare, marriage equality, lots of other issues. We innovate in the private sector with technology and software and biotech, where we improve the standard of living for billions of people around the world. But our system is woefully just old and creaky, and it fails spectacularly when there's more than 2 people running. So it's time to apply that ingenuity and spirit of innovation and problem solving to this. Agreed? Yes. Okay. Now, we all pretty much know what ranked choice voting is, right? Okay. Right. 3 candidates. You can rank them 1, 2, 3. First choice, second choice, third choice, et cetera. As many candidates as there are running, you have the power to rank them. So another way to talk about ranked choice voting is to think about it in terms of you can still vote for the way you vote now. You pick your first choice. If you love someone, you want them to win, you put them down as your first choice, as your favorite. And then you get the additional power of backup choices. So it's not a wholesale revolution in terms of the mechanics on your ballot. It's an addendum. It's just a tweak. In addition to that one column that we all use now, you get some more columns. You get backup choices. If your favorite cannot win, does not have the support to continue in the instant runoff, then your vote will instantly transfer to your next available backup. That's it. So raise your hand if you love to get the power of backup choices on your ballot. Right? Raise your hand if you go to the store and you want one thing, and if they're out of that thing, you pick something as your backup choice. Is ranked choice voting complicated? No, it's a myth. And there's data to show that it's a myth too, and we'll get into that. All right, so let's get into how we choose our winner with ranked choice voting, yeah? Okay, so here's a scenario where 4 people are running, and with ranked choice voting, you start by only counting the first choices. So a lot of folks come into this, they're like, is this a scoring system? Are these weights? No, it's a runoff system. And the academic term for this is called a single transferable vote. So it's a single vote, one person, one vote, but you only have one active vote at a time. So in the beginning, when everyone turns their ballots in, we look at everyone's first choice vote. And if any candidate has more than 50%, a majority, the election is over. They win. But if no candidate has a majority, so new elections, same candidates, you have a split field, now you go into the instant runoff process. Very simple. You eliminate the lowest vote getters. Those voters who voted for them have their vote transferred to their backup. You continually do this until the remaining candidates emerge with one being first to a majority. That's it. So here we have strong orange, weak orange, strong purple, weak purple. No one has a majority of first choice votes. So we eliminate the weakest candidate, who is? Yeah. And so now we get those voters' backup choices. So most of those voters, being voters who voted for an orange candidate, want another orange candidate as their backup, right? You can look at these colors as anything you want. They could be platforms, ethnic groups, identity of some kind, whatever, however a voter wants to decide how they make that determination. And so out of the 5%, you have a 3% to orange and then maybe a trickle to the purple candidates, right? You may have noticed that the exit polls for Nader, if Nader had not been in the race, do you remember what percentage would have voted for George Bush? 27%. 45 for Gore, 27 for Bush. So voters are not a monolith. And this voting system actually reveals that. So now, does any candidate in this instant runoff have a majority now? No. So what do? We do the exact same thing we just did. We eliminate which candidate? Yep, weak purple. And we distribute those votes to their backup choice. And these are purpley voters. So they're probably inordinately going to vote for strong purple as their second choice. Do we have a majority winner now? Yes. Who? Good. Just checking your eyesight. Okay. So what happened here? If this were a regular old school pick one and pray plurality election, who would have won? But with ranked choice voting, that actually allows the true majority sentiment that you can kind of see visually consolidate and emerge. Now who wins? So the district or the state or whatever wanted to move in a purple direction. With plurality voting, that sentiment gets buried because it cuts off the way we see the world. We see the world in relative terms, but the ballot is just a flat, pick one and pray system. With ranked choice voting, it's more expressive. And it actually reflects a lot more richness in data about how voters feel about the candidates and how they feel about where they want to move their country or their district or what have you. I'll take questions just about this, but we're going to save a bigger section for Q&A at the end. Any questions about how it's counted?
Would you have allowed 4 choices here?
Yes. What was the question? Oh, sorry. Would we have allowed 4 choices, 4 rankings on the ballot? Sure.
So sorry, this is an obvious question, but if in round 1 you get 51%, then it's over.
Correct.
Yeah.
With ranked choice voting, does it result in there being a tie between the 2 strongest candidates more often?
There's no data to support that. No. Yeah.
If you don't want to vote for all the candidates, if you only want to vote for 3 of them, can you do that?
Very good point. You never have to rank any candidate if you don't want to. You can rank as many or as few. So some voters might be like, whoa, there's a big grid of bubbles. I can't deal with all this choice. I don't want to take advantage of it. I only want to pick one like I do now. You can do that. You can just not rank more than 1 if you like. You had a question?
I think I just answered my own question. Okay.
All right, congratulations.
Does our voting system currently automatically calculate this, or what makes it?
Yes. That's right. So the bulk of our optical scan machines can be adapted to create a grid of bubbles, and then it's run through a tabulator to instantly pick the result. Yeah.
Which raises my question. The ballot itself, it strikes me could appear to many voters to be confusing.
Yep.
They may vote more than one bubble for one candidate or something like that.
That's right. So what you're describing is called, in election parlance, is called an overvote, where you can't determine the voter intent. because they're voting for two things for the equivalent ranking. And so the only choice is to throw the ballot out. But fear not. In an optical scan machine that works with this, it spits the ballot out, they throw it away, and they pick a new ballot. So so you always have a second opportunity to just cast a correct ballot. But we'll get into data that actually dispels the myth that voters are creating more errors or are getting disenfranchised. It's actually not true. All right, last question, then we'll move on. Yes?
Is this happening within one party, or is this representing Republicans, Democrats, Independents?
Up to you. So this could be like a reflecting of two, orange and purple might be the major parties in a general election, where the light colors are, libertarian on the red side and a green party on the Dem blue side, if you want. Or within a primary, there could be a whole spectrum of direction where people want to move the primary. So if you want it to reflect that, to think about it, that's fine too.
So there's no primary for Republicans?
Oh, sorry. In terms of what we would propose and what happened in Maine, they propose and we would reflect the same. You use ranked choice voting in each party primary to pick that party's best, that majority winner, the soul of the party, unified direction, and then you use it again in the general election. So we would not change that structure of primaries and then generals. There's a lot of folks talking about open primary systems or jungle primary, blanket primary. California has a top 2 blanket primary. We are not advocating for that system here because without ranked choice voting, that system results in massive vote splitting, just like the top 2 mayoral race in Boston that I showed and in Chicago that just happened a few days ago. Okay, let's move on, and there'll be more opportunity for questions later. Okay. So if we had ranked choice voting, Nader voters could vote Nader first, Gore second, or Bush second, however they like. Nader is the lowest vote getter in the first round. He gets eliminated. Those second choices now go to the other candidate that's in the race. Could change the outcome. Certainly gives every voter a voice. Make sure we hear every voter and everyone has a seat at the table. This is one of my favorite examples. It's slowly being eclipsed by a new one, which is Howard Schultz being an independent. But it's interesting because Bernie, for all of his political career, almost all, he was an independent. So why didn't he run as an independent in the general election, 2016? Not only can you not win, he'd be pulling a Nader. He'd be committing political suicide, right? That would be the last thing in this current system that he should be doing strategically. And that's why Schultz is getting so much heat today. But imagine, not just the outcome may have changed. Think about this from the perspective of voter turnout. There were 2 million Democratic voters that did turn out in 2012 that stayed home in 2016. There's probably a lot of them that were Bernie supporters that were really disaffected after the primary, what happened. But the other perspective you could look at this with is the tone and tenor of the debate, what the ideas were during that general election. It was bruising. There was so much vilification, mudslinging, attack ads, character assassination. Imagine how that may have been different with a legitimate third candidate in that debate. And yes, here we are. So the winner of the Democratic primary, which is going to be a really crowded field, as it is already, against Schultz, against Trump, we're setting ourselves up for quite a scenario, another spoiler scenario. So we tell America you can either get Schultzed or you can get ranked choice voting. Choice is yours. Okay, and then voters in this local election with a crowded field can vote in a cluster. They can vote among candidates that reflect what they want. It's no longer a zero-sum game. The other big benefit to local communities is that instead of a 2-round runoff system where you often get anemic voter turnout, usually in the preliminary, you combine them into one instant runoff election. So you save the city money and you increase turnout and engagement. So a lot of great benefits here. There's one I want to highlight, which is more positive campaigning, which we'll jump into after this section. So Maine became the first state in U.S. history to enact ranked choice voting by the ballot a couple years ago, and then ran 2 successful statewide elections using the system last year. Around the country, we have about 12 communities that have been using ranked choice voting, many more that have enacted it and are awaiting their first usage. So we have nearly 4 million Americans today that live in communities that use ranked choice voting. Cities like San Francisco, Oakland, Santa Fe, New Mexico, Minneapolis, and St. Paul, Minnesota have had excellent, excellent experiences with this system. It's been used for over 100 years for national elections in Australia, nearly 100 years to elect the President of Ireland, and about a half a century with an indirect election of president in India. The Indian Congress uses this to elect their president. And lots of local and party offices as well around the world. We won't get into the Oscars because the result really pissed a lot of people off, but a lot of professional organizations as well. Okay, this is one of my favorite parts. Okay, we talked about negative campaigning. We talk about, we all kind of get it, like it's good campaign strategy from an operative level to go negative. Your goal in a plurality election is just to squeak by, just to get a few more votes than your strongest opponent. So a legitimate tactic is to just beat down your strongest opponent, rally your base, and then peel away enough swing voters to just eke by before them. Now with ranked choice voting, the whole game changes. And this has been not only with anecdotal evidence or from observations from the media in cities that use it, but also some data I'll show you in a bit. But there's some really nice quotes here. The East Bay Times in San Francisco, candidates are even campaigning together, trying to win goodwill of each other's supporters. In Minneapolis, candidates said they didn't want to alienate each other's supporters for fear of losing out on those second choice votes. And this sentence at the end, they literally held hands and sang Kumbaya. So I want to flag that to note the dangers of ranked choice voting. It's not a panacea. We have the footage of that. It's so corny. Some of us wanted to play it for audiences. I'm like, no, we're not doing it. Okay. Under plurality, if I'm canvassing for the purple candidate and I come to a house that has the sign for the orange candidate, what do?
Keep walking.
Just keep it moving. Bye. Not talking to you. I'm not going to engage. You're not in my universe. That's what they say. But under ranked choice voting, I go to the door. I have a conversation with that voter. I appeal to common interests. My candidate has to have a platform that appeals to a broad base of support, that appeals to a majority in order to win. Sounds a lot like governing, doesn't it? You should be appealing to a broad, you should be governing for the majority or for the whole, so you should also be campaigning for the whole, shouldn't you? So when I'm at the door, I'm going to talk to this voter. I'm going to say, I know I'm not going to get your first choice vote for my candidate, but their environmental record is very much in line with your thoughts, it sounds like. They're pro-marriage equality, whatever the issue may be, and I'm going to try to earn their second choice vote on the issues. The one thing I'm not going to do is slam their favorite, is mudsling, because that's going to alienate that voter. They're not going to put me second or third on their ballot. That's the politics of division. But with ranked choice voting, we can evolve past that. And here's Betsy Hodges ran for mayor and talked about behaving this way in order to cobble together that crucial majority and win the election. And we can share this slideshow with folks who can click through and see that video. And then the data. Dr. Todd Donovan and Carolyn Tolbert did a study on hundreds of ranked choice voting elections versus comparable cities that did not use ranked choice voting. They used exit polls with voters, and voters literally observed or reported that they experienced less negativity. So in the red bars, non-ranked choice voting cities, and 25% of voters were reporting a great deal of negativity, and only 5% of those voters from ranked choice voting cities reporting such negativity. Now, when you compare ranked choice voting to plurality voting, it's a common myth that this is going to be confusing, voters are going to screw it up, it's going to alienate voters because there's too many bubbles on the ballot, or whatever folks are trying to intuit. And it may seem intuitive because we have been voting the same way for a couple hundred years in many cases. But when we want to look at data, we want to look at the research, and it just shows that rates of errors on the ballots are identical. There's no statistical significant difference in error rates on the ballot. And in fact, when you compare these to the turnout in runoff elections, you get, on average, a 10% higher voter turnout. And then the question of, another sign of engagement and understanding is, are voters actually even filling out the rankings? The Secretary of Maine, Matt Dunlap, in the beginning wasn't a big fan of ranked choice voting. His office predicted, now he's been the chief elections officer for many years there, his office predicted that there are probably less than half of voters in Maine's first statewide ranked choice voting election would even rank more than one candidate. And what did we found? We found that nearly 90% of voters in Maine's first statewide primary used the rankings, ranked more than one. And when you look at Santa Fe, 88% of voters in their first mayoral election for ranked choice voting used the rankings, and 61% ranked all 5 candidates, which begs a new question. Perhaps ranked choice voting, a more expressive ballot, creates an incentive for voters to engage more deeply with an election. So the research is very early, but it's very intriguing, and we're going to help support any academic effort that wants to delve into that as we have more of these elections around the country. We have data from the Bay Area, statistically significant data that compares cities that used ranked choice voting before and after they switched over, compares to cities in the same time period, the same number of cycles that did not adopt ranked choice voting. That actually shows that more women and more people of color run and get elected in cities that use ranked choice voting. So when you look at all the cities up here that are using it, compared to the national average, you see a stark difference there. And in those cities, this is the percentage of people of color in terms of populations of the cities in the chart. Oakland is about 3/4 people of color, same with Memphis, and on down. Very promising results here in terms of diversity and promoting a more inclusive democracy. And so for this chart, for people of color on the left and women candidates of color on the right, for cities that adopted ranked choice voting, you see a much bigger increase with the bar chart on the left versus those who did not adopt in the same time period. And then here, for female candidates of color, there was no change in representation for candidates that did not adopt ranked choice voting, and a 7% increase in those that did. So again, you can click through and look at the studies for these sections when we share the slideshow. And then the other thing that Matt Dunlap in Maine was wringing his hands about is it's going to cost $1.5 million additional to run ranked choice voting statewide. And when push came to shove, it only cost their office $110,000. And he reported this in a webinar after the fact, that when you added it all up, the bulk of that was the courier service to bring some of the ballots to Augusta to do the tabulation, and the pizza fund to make sure the staff were fed over the weekend when they were counting the ballots.
Does that cost in addition to what it would have cost?
Yes. No, yeah, it's just in addition. Yeah, I don't remember the exact cost for the full election as a whole. Let's wait until we get to the end, unless it's...
It is.
Okay.
Was it because this was the first time it had been done, or would you assume there would be a higher cost every time?
No, there'd be the same cost every time. I would think there'd be more in a primary because there's just more contests happening because there's multiple parties rather than a general. But often in lots of things in government processes, they're going to give a healthy, generous estimate to make sure everything's covered. And if they have to bootstrap it, they can actually figure out how to contain costs and figure out how to do it at cost. But there's costs that might impact how quickly you can get the results. So that's another question we can talk about is when do you get the majority results, because you have to get all the data into one place to do the tabulation. So for statewide, there's usually a delay of a few more days to get the results. But we have an approach in Massachusetts that would keep that time to be negligible, and we could talk about that in Q&A. So the cost estimate for this, for Massachusetts, single-digit millions, probably even less. We're still working that out. We're meeting with the Secretary's office actually in a few weeks to talk them through that and see if we can get some partnered research and get this going so we can make a plan for implementation here. Okay, so Maine passed ranked choice voting 2 years ago. I called a meeting of election reform folks. I had a small list of 200 people. I thought I'd get 5 or 10 people out to our office in Boston. We had 54 people come out, and we started organizing. And we've grew that list to 25,000 supporters statewide today, about just shy of 5,000 volunteer signups. We've raised money. We've raised almost $700,000 so far. I'd say there's like there's maybe 5 institutional supporters, and everybody else is an individual donor. I think about 450,000 of that are all individual $25, $50, $250, $1,000, $10,000 individual donors. So it's a pretty broad base of donor. And we can talk more, but we'd love to get folks in here to contribute today. And I'll kind of go into some details as to why right now is a really critical time to help. So some key endorsements, as I mentioned before. Got to work with the existing political infrastructure. Democratic Party is very strong. 80% of the state house is a Democrat. 100% of our congressional delegation is Democrat. So it's obviously very important to ensure that the party is a full partner in this as we move forward. One really interesting potential avenue is to establish this for the presidential primary, to get it ready for that time. So we've sent some emails out to the leadership in the party to try to get conversations going, because we're going to have to move very quickly if the secretary is going to have time to implement this. I think our primaries are in March, February? March, yeah.
Republicans, is it on their platform?
Republican, the platform convention is I think it's like every 6 years, so we just missed the boat. We did go to the Republican convention last year. We signed up 20% of all the attendees there, 455 people, so they've been on our list getting our emails. So we're working on that. We're definitely working to at least move up the chain and get a lot of Republican support, yeah.
Who is most opposed to it and why? And are they the greatest impediment, or is it just like inertia?
Yeah, good question. So a lot of folks around, so you may think like, well, is the secretary opposed to this? Because it changes a lot of what the secretary would do. He's actually a strong advocate for this. This is a tweet that he sent a few months ago. So he watched the results in Maine. He wasn't sure. He's like, I kind of agree with it as a policy, but I want to see it play out in Maine so that things don't explode. Everything was smooth. And this is what he tweeted. So we're really looking forward to work with him. Usually the folks that oppose this are candidates who've been winning under plurality and then suddenly lose their first election under ranked choice. And then they're like, well, that's not fair. I've been getting the most votes every time. So a great example was Bruce Poliquin in Maine CD2. We all remember that race. And Fox News National actually came up and we did a quick interview. And then when it played out, it was like Bruce Poliquin versus me. And there was Doug Kennedy, the news anchor, and he said, Adam, Bruce says he got the most votes in the election, but then he lost. Is that fair? I said, actually, yeah, it is fair, because he didn't get a majority. So he had his faction, but his support was hollowed out. There were 2 independent candidates that pulled 8% away from the 2 frontrunners, and Bruce Poliquin squeaked by in the first round above Golden. But then when you accounted for that 8% of voters, they inordinately leaned toward Jared Golden. And so he picked up and he was able to cross the 50% threshold, and Poliquin just didn't have that wide support. And there's going to be a loser. There's going to be a new winner and a new loser in some cases, particularly in a close contest. But the point is to get the most accurate picture of what voters want, and that's exactly what it did. So it was a textbook example of ranked choice voting working as it should. It just didn't turn out well for that particular incumbent. And we'll go into a couple other examples of folks who may oppose in a minute. The Globe has written 3 editorials in support of ranked choice voting, some of the most supportive in the country among newspapers, but lots of other papers have actually published editorials. Their boards have supported New York Times, Washington Post, and The Economist, among others. A lot of organizations are starting to come on now. We're trying to get union support, but that takes time. You have to kind of work up the locals, and you have to have dedicated people working on that, so we're on our way there. Social workers are on board. Obviously, the other parties are on board. Mass Purge, Mass Vote, League of Women Voters. And then 3 members of Congress, one of which may be here tonight or is coming. Coming? Very good. We mobilized quite a bit, and we were able to get 82 co-sponsors in the first month of the session this time around. So ranked choice voting is actually one of the most talked about pieces of legislation now in the State House. So that's 41% of the State House signing on to make ranked choice voting law. And this is the primary campaign that we're doing now with voter choice, is making sure that we're all mobilized to ensure that those who have not signed on are getting on board. And we're hoping to get 70% support of the State House for our 2 bills by May. So this is a point where folks here can definitely come in and plug in and make calls, and obviously write and email, call and email your own senators and reps. And the first bill is really just like Maine, establish ranked choice voting for all state and federal offices. And we also have a lot of down ballot races like district attorney, register of probate, clerk of courts, et cetera. This would apply to. And then the second bill is simply enabling legislation. It doesn't make anybody do anything. It allows cities and towns to have an easier mechanism to switch over to ranked choice voting. Currently, they have to use a home rule petition or a charter change, and those take many years, and they have to ask the State House permission, things like that. So give them more freedom to try this out. So this is our campaign right now, so we want to definitely welcome folks to participate in that, and we'll pass around some things that you can engage with that. And then if the legislature does not act, we're going for a 2020 ballot measure. And we're working with the pioneers in Maine regularly. They're advising us in terms of how they pulled it off, how they did it, and how we can apply the lessons learned to our situation in Massachusetts. We're 6 times the size of Maine, so it's going to take a lot more people, endorsements, and money. Speaking of money, so the final budget, if our effort were to convert into a ballot measure campaign, right now we're a 501c4 and a 501c3, but there's a lot of talk about maybe do we want to do a ballot measure. The budget for that's going to be about $10 million. If there's a lot of paid opposition, that budget could shoot up to $15 million. That's what it takes to win an issue that a lot of people have not heard about. A lot of the folks that we engage with in political spaces, they're following the news, they're following elections, they care about elections, they're thinking about it deeply. So they immediately get ranked choice voting, they get the benefits, and they want to support it. But there's just millions of voters out there that they only turn out in the presidential election. That's all they think about. They're busy, they're working, they're not that engaged. And so when they read about ranked choice voting, if we can't transmit the message, not only craft a message that communicates what it is, how it works, how it benefits them very quickly, and then distribute that at scale, we can't win. People will vote no. So that's a really important lesson for folks here. And so in order to distribute that message at scale, we need a lot of money to test messaging and to send it through social media in high number and target various segments of voters, and also TV ads, as any campaign will need. You need to buy your TV spots way early so you're not paying quadruple the price as all the presidential campaigns are buying up media in competition with us. So that's a very important lesson. So on our way to that, one missing critical piece in our organization right now is a communications director. So we've been able to successfully garner over 270 media hits, including those Globe endorsements, with no paid help, no comms director. But now we have to step it up and put some paid, skilled hands on that to turn hundreds into thousands of earned media and eventually buy up a lot of paid media. And then that plus, we need more field organizers to cover the entirety of the state. So the Hewlett Foundation has put up a match, $200,000. If we can raise $200,000 of 501c3 education fund donors in state, they will match us. They will give us a lump $200,000 grant that will allow us to hire comms director and those field organizers. So I'm pleased to report that the gap that we had as of early Wednesday was $90,000 remaining. But we had an advisory board summit and a huge statewide meeting at Democracy Brewing, this great worker co-op in downtown Boston. And in 10 minutes, our advisory board was able to pitch in and knock that $90,000 down to $42,000 remaining. So we were able to raise over $40,000 in a very short period of time from our great advisory board. So I wanted to put the challenge to this room. if folks want to band together and chip in to see how far through this amount we could get to get us to that $200,000 goal, to release that grant and then supercharge our efforts here. Because if we don't win Massachusetts, it puts the entire national campaign for this reform on ice. So we say Maine was the testing ground for ranked choice voting. And with your help, Massachusetts will be the launch pad. And so we have to succeed. We cannot lose. And it's not an easy issue to win. So it takes all of us coming together to make this happen. So we have envelopes that folks have had.
Did everybody get an envelope when they walked in? Yeah? Great. Hold up your envelope.
So I want to see maybe we can raise $5,000, $10,000 here today, perhaps. So what I'm going to ask folks to do, we're going to write some names and amounts down here. And if folks want to throw out a number that you want to pledge or donate right now, that would be fantastic. So anybody can start, raise your hand. It could be any amount of money, $25, $50, $250, $500, $1,000, whatever. It could be $10. Everything helps. 20, yes, thank you. What's your name? Tony. Tony Beatty. $20. Thank you, Tony.
Last name, please? Can you say your last
Yeah,
name?
say your last name. Anyone else? 50. Your name? Joan, thank you. Joan and Whistle. In the front.
10 Kate.
10, Kate Kavanaugh. 25. Your full name? Okay. Linya Zhu. Shu? Thank you. 75. Sorry, Ellen? Ellen Quackbush. 75. Thank you. In the back with the glasses. Hey, 100.
Can I just make a little comment here? On the envelope, there's also a volunteering option where you can do volunteering and field work with me, and it's super fun.
One ask at a time. One ask at a time. We'll get to that. We'll get to that. All right. What's your last name, ma'am?
Adam, I think we need a repeat of that last one.
Fillmore.
And the first name?
First name? Ellen? Colleen Fillmore. Thank you. Yes, with the glasses. Susan Elberger, 100. Thank you.
Vivian Sang, 250.
Whoa! Vivian Sang, 250. Thank you.
Can I say something?
Yes.
You know how you get a tune in your head and you can't get rid of it? After I first heard Adam talk about ranked choice voting, I have the definition of insanity running through my head. And it stayed in my head. Because what is the definition of insanity? You do the same thing over and over again and you expect a different result. So today I thought, I'm going to do something differently. I am going to combine all of my contributions to various candidates between now and 2000. And I'm putting my money behind mass choice. So mass choice, voter choice, Massachusetts. That's what I'm going to do.
Thank you, Vivian. Sir. Total or combined? Total. And what's your full name? Jeff Loeb, L-O-B-E. L-O-E-B? L-O-E-B, Jeff Loeb.
And what
And
was the
Catherine.
amount?
Jeff and Catherine Loeb.
I didn't hear
100 in total. Ma'am.
$50, Diane and Alan Proctor.
Diane and Alan Proctor, $50. Thank you so much.
Sean Yang, 100.
Sean Yang, $100.
Paul Horwich, 100.
Paul Horwitz, 100. Thank you, Paul. Excellent. Yes. Molly Byron, 20. Excellent. Yes. Nancy Graham, 50. And what's our total so far?
I'm going to figure that out.
We have a team of 3 on this. Someone be a totaler. Okay, in the back. Whoa, Lori Laura Miller, $250. Awesome. Thank you, Laura. Yes. Carol Berman, $40. Thank you. Julie Mader, $40. Thank you.
Christian Kruger, 10, but it's like half my net worth.
All right. Amazing. Progressive investments. Thank you, Christian. What's our total?
I'm adding now.
Okay. Go ahead.
Lucia Hicks, 25.
Lucia Hicks, 25. We didn't game this out too much, so. Anyone else? We're waiting for that total?
No.
This is excellent progress. Yes? What's your last name? John Lee, $200. Thank you so much. Proctor. Just put, we'll call her.
Okay.
Who's Proctor?
Okay, we got that.
The Proctor's right here.
Alan Proctor? I'm sorry, I missed it.
Yes, sir. Stephen Bader, $100. Thank you. Man. Excellent. Zach and David Greaves, $200. Thank you. Izette and David Greaves. Izette and David Greaves, $200.
Izette and David Greaves.
Izette.
We are at 1,935.
Wow. Yes. Your name? Janet Rothrock, $100. Thank you. Tenor came in. Thank you. What's your name? Dina Samview, $10. Excellent. Thank you. Yes. Your last name? And Deb Busser, $100. Thank you. Wow, Patty King, $250. Not $2.50. $250. Patty King, $250. Excellent. How about Jeff?
I have to look at whether I can give because I've got some restrictions from the FTC.
Ah, I see. Okay.
But I will follow up with you.
Sorry to call you up, but it was cool. It's good to see you. All right, sorry.
Can we just have Janet's last name?
Janet, who's Janet? Last name. Thank you. David Lee Rothrock. What's our total now?
2,395.
That's amazing. Do we want to go for 2,500? Someone says, yeah, I have a yes over here.
Oh, I think mine 7,500. Yeah.
Ellen
Quackenbush increased from 75 to 100.
Okay.
So we'll add 25.
So it's 2,420.
2,420. You want to do 200? Did you give before?
Yeah, from 1 to what?
Colleen, what did you give before? Okay, moving from 1 to 2. Thank you.
2,520.
$2,522. That is amazing. Guys, this was incredible.
Okay, John, where's John? Did you count yours? You gave 20 before.
Yes.
Did you count it?
I did not.
Well, that's another 20.
All right, another 20. Thank you.
John, what's your last name?
Espinosa.
John Espinosa. That is awesome. So we can, we have folks with, you can either do card readers, checks, cash, it's fine, put them in the envelope. If you have a card, John is coming around, and we have someone else with a reader coming around.
All right.
Okay. Monica, you probably give that phone to someone else so I can speak it out. Okay. Monica's going to talk to you a little bit about, so now that we've asked folks for money, we're going to ask folks to volunteer if you'd like. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. It's this kind of dynamic, this kind of community unity and coming together that will make this possible. I can't thank you guys enough. And thank you for having faith in our strategy, our leadership. Because we're doing something that's very hard to do. But we will win. Okay, so I'll show you some charts in terms of our legislative map at this point while Monica's talking about some field work we can do. We're going to do QA first.
Okay, well, someone asked a question before about printed copies of the presentation. Can you raise your hand? Who asked about that? What is your name?
No, I'm sorry, I would like to get.
You would like to get one? What's your name?
Susan Elbert.
Susan Elberg. Okay, I can make sure to get that to you.
Is it online?
Yeah. She wants a printed copy though.
Oh,
so
yeah,
it's
that's fine.
printed
No,
copy.
if folks have signed up, we're getting your phone. We'll email it out to everybody. Everybody that has into that slide, put it through, research.
Okay, so on those really important envelopes that many of you had put donations in, the really important part for me is the field work. So on there's a lot of options about how you can take action to get this passed in Massachusetts. So raise your hand if you think you'd like to work with me and do field work to get this going. All right, that's it? What? No hands in that.
Is it the issue or is it mine?
Is it me? All right, Colleen's raising her hand for me. All right. So on that envelope, there are a number of things that you can check off for actions that you can actually take. And I hope that you will consider working with me on that. So I wanted to thank you, Adam, for the presentation. Now I'd like to acknowledge some of the wonderful legislators that are here with us today. Tammy, can you stand up? Yay. Tammy is a strong champion of ranked choice voting in the State House. Is Representative Benson still here? Oh, there you are. So thank you so much, Jen. Jen actually introduced the local version of the ranked choice voting bill. So big hand for Jen. It's my understanding that Jamie Eldridge will be coming by at around 3 o'clock. So he is another huge champion like Tammy and Jen for ranked choice voting. If you'd like to talk to Jamie Eldridge at about 3 o'clock, there's nobody else using this room, so we have it all day. We can stay here and talk to Jamie about ranked choice voting. All right, next I would like to talk to you about the other legislator that we will be hearing from today, and that is our Congresswoman, Lori Trahan. So she's going to speak to us from 2:15 until 3 o'clock. And this is actually her first public town hall since her swearing in. So how exciting is that she's here with us? So the format that she's going to use is going to be a short introduction, and then she's going to focus on your questions. Now, who's going to ask her if she supports ranked choice voting? Yeah. But do we need to keep asking? Yes, we do. Keith's going to ask if she supports ranked choice voting. And then hopefully you'll be addressing a lot of other issues that are near and dear to your heart with Laura. And then she will have a short closing statement, and she does need to be gone at 3 o'clock. So we'll just have 45 minutes with her. And I think that is about, oh, one other thing. I wanted to, because this is a 3rd Congressional District Town Hall, I also wanted to give a huge shout out to Andy Vargas in Haverhill. He is a state rep, and like Jen, he introduced the state and federal version of the ranked choice voting bill. So we are actually extremely grateful for both Jen Benson and Andy Vargas up in Haverhill in the 3rd Congressional District for both being champions of the bill. So next, is Margaret here? Margaret Scarsdale? Margaret Scarsdale, are you here? Can someone go get her that knows her? That would be fantastic. Margaret Scarsdale is the other moderator for today, and she's going to talk to you about the format and the rules that we're going to be using during our town hall with Lori. And essentially, we're going to have 1 minute to ask questions, and you will be timed. And Lori's going to have 2 minutes to answer those questions, and she will be timed as well. And Margaret, take it away. Thank you so much.
All right, so I am Margaret Scarsdale. Sorry I was out of the room. Thank you all so much for coming today. If you would like to ask a question, because we only have the Congresswoman until 3, we'd like this to be as efficient as possible, please raise your hand. We have 3 volunteers, Amy, April, and Pam. They're scattered around the room, and they will call on you. Please try to limit your questions to 1 minute. They're going to show you a timer so that we can hear from as many different voices on as many different issues as possible. If you don't get to ask your question, we do have note cards out on the table as you come in. You can submit that to us in writing, and we will get that to the Congresswoman. And of course, we are hoping that this will be the first of many town halls with Representative Trahan, so you will have other opportunities to ask your questions. I see she's doing photos in the other room, so do you mind? Yes.
Can I just go 1 second?
Yeah.
Okay, did everybody pass in their envelopes? Can you raise your hand if you have an envelope that you need to pass in? And John, could you help out collecting those? I will go get Lori.
I think I'll back up here because she's 6 feet tall.
Oh. We need to turn that light off. Nancy, are you able to turn the light off on that projector? Thank you. So it is my honor to introduce you to Lori Trahan. Representative Trahan was born and raised in a working class family in Lowell, Massachusetts. As one of 4 girls growing up in a union household, Lori learned the value of hard work at a very early age. After earning a scholarship to play Division I volleyball at Georgetown University, Lori worked as Chief of Staff to former Congressman Marty Meehan, followed by a successful career in high tech and business. She and her husband Dave are raising 2 young girls. And as a member of the House Education and Labor and House Armed Services Committee, Lori is focused on fighting for working families on issues such as affordable health care, quality public education, workforce development, the environment, and addressing the opioid crisis. So welcome, Congresswoman.
Thank you. Doesn't keep Concord out. That's great. It's great. I'm so delighted to be here. I see so many familiar faces. I think I debated, had 2 forums right here on the stage, so it's nice to be back. And frankly, it's just nice to be home. The last 2 months have been, well, finish the sentence. But there has been a lot of terrific work that's happening behind the scenes. Certainly, this 116th Congress is record-breaking, and the 131 women who are occupying seats there. And I do want to recognize, although I'm sure they've already been recognized, but Tammy Gouveia and Jen Benson as part of that movement. There's nothing quite like taking the oath of office in the middle of a government shutdown. You know, you have all this motivation, all of this energy, all of these plans on what you're going to do. And then you're faced with the harsh reality that once everyone clears the room, including my 4- and 8-year-old daughters, that we need to reopen the government. We need to get people back to work. We need to get the country back on track. And what's great, and I hope you agree, is that the Democrats have proven to be the adults in the room, time and again. Whether we're talking about ending the shutdown and divorcing that from any policy debate, to not undermining our Constitution and our very democracy by allowing this president to do an end run around Congress's Article 1 responsibilities and calling a fake national emergency, to having a productive and open conversation around evidence-based solutions for the southern border. And so that is really what the first 4 weeks of work looked like. All the while, we put our head down and we worked on the 2 committees that we thought would produce results for the state of Massachusetts. One is the House Armed Services Committee. As you all know, the person who has held the 3rd congressional seat has had a seat on that committee for 25 years. It's not only important to the economy in Massachusetts and to the jobs that DoD spending supports here, but I like to add it also gives oversight to the fastest growing part of our budget. Secondly, Education and Labor, Massachusetts has not had anybody on that committee in quite some time, and so I was excited to land a position on that committee. Legislation has been, I've never seen legislation drafted and dropped so quickly. You know, Democrats were very excited to get the majority back, and they were ready. I think Speaker Pelosi opens up every meeting with majority, 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 because I think we've been moving very quickly on basically restoring some priorities that the country wants. H.R. 1 is the first thing that we dropped, and that is to make the government once again for the people. Getting the dark money out of politics, continuing to make sure that we have transparency and disclosure, making sure our elected officials are held to the highest ethical standards, including our president, who would be required under this law to disclose his tax returns, and also to restore our voting rights. We saw in 2018, once again, voter rolls purged, access to polls be compromised, and this is sweeping legislation, a package of hundreds of bills, all to show that before we tackle any of the priorities, policy issues, policy priorities, that we get this right in order to restore faith and trust in our government. Second, the Green New Deal. I'm a proud co-sponsor of the Green New Deal. I'm so excited that finally, we're not just talking about border security, we are actually talking about the environment. If the Green New Deal has done anything, it's got everyone talking about how bold our vision needs to be as a country. And the climate change and economic opportunity need not be separate from each other. There's a huge opportunity for us to close our income inequality gap while also saving our planet. I know we're going to get to a conversation real fast, but I want to also highlight just a few things. Because I'm on the Ed and Labor Committee, we've been in markups. That's where I spend a lot of my time. And we've been marking up school rebuilding, making sure that's part of an infrastructure bill, making sure our schools have what they need so that our students are in great environments to learn. Paid leave, making sure that we have an opportunity for people to take time away from work to care for a loved one and not be dinged for that. Paycheck fairness. I lived that myself as someone who worked in high tech. I know exactly how important it is for us to get women earning exactly as much as their male counterparts. I don't have to tell you, but women like me, it's 82 cents on the dollar. that number plummets for women of color, and we just have to fix that and make sure we have equal pay for equal work. What else have we done on committee? Minimum wage. We are marking up this week, minimum wage, $15 across the land. Hold on, I brought my notes. Look at how long that list of legislation is. We voted to finally get out of Yemen and to hopefully that will be us on a path to giving Congress back its right to hold this president accountable when he's considering using force in any part of the world. But we definitely definitely voted proactively on Yemen. And then this week while Michael Cohen was sitting in his hot seat with the Government Oversight and Reform Committee, and they did a fabulous job. I mean, talking about just comparing the side-by-side of Democrats and Republicans, I tend not to try to be, too partisan when I talk about these things, but you could not avert your eyes, right? We were looking for the truth, and the Republicans, unfortunately, were more focused on, undermining a witness who we already knew was compromised, right? And so while that was happening, I was in the House Armed Services Committee, the Subcommittee on Military Personnel, making sure that we got to the bottom of this transgender ban. We had an unbelievable panel of transgender servicemen and women who talked about how they rise to every standard, how they would expect nothing less. We heard about their impeccable records of service, and then we got to question the Office of the Secretary of Defense on this discriminatory ban. So we'll be moving very quickly to ensure that this goes no further. And there's already, it's not into effect right now because of the courts, but legislatively we're going to take steps to make sure that never sees the light of day. And then finally, I am not with my colleagues right now marching from Selma to Montgomery, but this is the 54th anniversary of the Voting Rights Act, and we will be dropping legislation this week for that as well. So there's a lot happening in the background. I'm sure you have a lot on your mind. I have a lot to share beyond what we just discussed in that little overview, but why don't we move to questions, because that makes it much more exciting. Right, I'm not in charge of this, right?
Start in this section, so why don't we start in the front, the woman in the black. So you stand.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
What is the best way for us to reach members of Congress who are not ours?
Oh, yes. Well, first of all, don't hesitate to ever call me.
Thank you.
In fact, I should mention that Joe Thibodeau is in the back, Jackie Bard is in the back, they're members of my team. We did keep Congresswoman Tsongas's flagship office in Lowell. We also kept the office in Lawrence. Yes, good. So if you know where that is, come visit us anytime. We didn't luck out in Washington. I don't know if you all heard this story, but I picked 81 in the lottery out of 88 numbers, so it didn't fare so well in DC. But come join us anyway, it's cozy. But I would urge, I mean, part of what made last year so exciting was the activism that, catapulted so many campaigns to victory. Not just mine, but across the country. We turned 40 red districts blue, and that's amazing. And that was done with people like you. So keeping that together and not just going from presidential to presidential or midterm to midterm is really important. So, and there's a lot to be active about, right? We have to keep putting pressure on Senate Republicans to do their duty and uphold Article 1, because I think what's most concerning right now is that we don't want to feel like any branch of government is accountable to the president or serving the president. We're here to serve the American people. That's why we have separation of government. That's why we have co-equal branches of government. So I would say do target your activism to other members. And we could obviously be helpful in finding numbers that you want to target. I mean, if you want to call our office in DC and get those names and numbers, we've got big directories. The House.gov website is also very helpful because you can look up by state all the other members on the House side, and then certainly Senate.gov on the Senate side. But it's, if you ever run into a roadblock, call us and we can get those resources to you.
What works best? Phone calls, letters, tweets, what works?
Well, I have to say it is a combination of all. Phones are ringing off the hook right now, and so sometimes I know because I used to answer that phone. Sometimes, and I think this is the people from Indivisible know this uniquely well. Offices won't entertain a lot of calls that come in from outside districts, right? So social media, I think, is a great venue for magnifying a message. And we've just seen it become really effective. So whether that's Facebook or Twitter, I think Facebook is very effective because there's just so many more people, so many more activists that are organized on Facebook. Okay, great. But I think social media is really helpful. You're welcome.
Hi, I'm Betsy Garcia. I live in Wheeltown, Maine, right next door. Hi. So I would like to know why you haven't yet co-sponsored HR 1384, Medicare for All. And I saw on a campaign policy website you said that healthcare is a human right. And there was an article a couple months ago after you've been elected that said that although you do not speak about the issue, you agree that, quote, language around single payer should be tempered. I'd like to know if you would commit right now to supporting HR 1384.
Yeah, I know. So I am 100% committed to universal health care. I have been, since I was a staff person, and I remember listening to Ted Kennedy make speeches on universal health care. The bill was just introduced 3 days ago. Unlike the last bill, it's not just a resolution, it's 120 pages long, and so we're just reading through it. And it's not, I imagine that we're going to move very quickly in a direction of hopefully co-sponsoring that bill. We're just doing our due diligence. I mean, there's a lot of proposals right now that are being discussed for making healthcare universal, and we're new. We like to read the legislation before we sponsor it, and that's the step we're taking. It's no other reason except that we're reading it through and we're making sure that it's a system that's sustainable and doesn't have anything that is a surprise in there. But I sit on the Progressive Caucus with co-chair Pramila Jayapal, and she's got me on a list. She asks me every day if I have any questions, and so I'm looking forward to coming out and supporting the bill. We're reading it through. That's what we're doing. So thank you for that. Yes. Oh, I'm sorry.
It's very important to get a Democrat in the White House, as we all know. And so I wanted to ask you, what 3 key points do you feel is important for the Democratic Party to get out across the country that aptly represents the Democratic Party so more people will vote for the Democratic candidate?
Yeah, no, that's a fabulous question. One thing, I'm really close to the new members of the Democratic Caucus, and you're reminded how different every district is in this country. You've got badass women like AOC and Ayanna Pressley that come from, very blue districts. You've got women like Lauren Underwood right outside of Chicago, Alyssa Slotkin, Cindy Axne from Iowa. They won by percentage points. And the majority makers of this party, we must remember, were those red to blues, right? Those many women, but some men as well, who really turned these Trump districts into blue districts after decades in some cases. And so I ask them often, what won in your district? What resonated? It was clear that healthcare was such an important message. People are just buckling under the cost of healthcare, which is why, moving toward a universal system is so important for our country, getting those prescription drug prices, down. So but also there is this income inequality gap that is just plaguing so many people in our country. I mean, I feel it in this district, whether I'm in Lawrence or Lowell or Fitchburg, and then smaller towns like Dracut and Pepperell. No matter where you go, the cost of living has just so dramatically outpaced people's earnings, and their opportunity has gotten more narrow. And so I do think that a big part of what we talk about has to be economic opportunity, getting a path into the middle class again. That starts with bolstering our unions. I mean, their rights have been stripped away over, the last 4 decades. I think we need more practical paths to education. I talked about it a lot on the campaign. I mean, I went to college and I was lucky that I got a scholarship, and it absolutely was the right path for me. But my husband went to the vocational school, has a very successful home building career, and I think we have to make those lanes not only more accessible in our public schools, but more noble. Our community colleges, our vocational and technical training, those are going to lead to good paying jobs. So I think we need to have a strong economic message. I also think we have to bring the standards way back up. I think people are yearning for a country where the standards are high on how we treat our allies abroad, on how we treat our environment, how we protect our future for our children. So I think it's going to be a combination of those two things. Thanks. I'm not supposed to pick. I'll only lose votes then.
Okay, why don't we have it right here?
Hi, Lori. I'm Sharon Jordan from Lunenburg, member of Invisible, Neshoba, current chairman of the Democratic Town Committee. I wanted to, first of all, thank you so much for the strong support you gave Nancy Pelosi, who has absolutely proven that she is a leader. Thank you also for supporting H.R. 8. It was one of the things that you did not mention. That is the background checks to try and address.
We're not done there yet.
And I wanted also to talk a little bit about health care. Obviously, I really hope that you will co-sponsor 1384. Yep. And I know from some of the other forums and things that we've been to that personal stories are really important for electeds to be able to tell and hear. Yeah. I just did my parents' taxes. My dad is 91, my mother is 86. Their health care expenses this year exceeded their Social Security income. It's absolutely insane. It is totally wrong. I look forward to your support of this bill, and just wanted to ask if there is anything that you think we should be doing to make this bill, part of the mainstream conversation.
Yeah. No, it's a great, and so I'm sure you're all reading right now the proposals that are being dropped. I mean, obviously Medicare for All has been the most popular, and like I said, unlike the Medicare for All bill that has been dropped in prior Congresses, this one actually is more than a resolution. It upends our current system, which I think is a good thing. We just want to read those 120 pages so that we understand exactly, what it does. That's all. But there's legislation being worked on for a public option that fills in the gap, because I think that there is a belief for some that 155 million workers today have employer-sponsored insurance, and they like it, and we need to cover the gap, right? And I think some people think a public option is a way to do that. And then certainly there has been the extension of our current Medicare system, making that eligible for people at an earlier age. So healthcare is being debated across the board. Everyone I think recognizes the fact that we have to decrease we just have to we have to make it affordable, and we have to make it universal. So there's no question. And I have stated before that I think Medicare for All is absolutely where we need to be going. I could imagine my co-sponsoring all 3 of them. I just want to read all 3 proposals in a very diligent way, so that I'm not, so that I can, speak emphatically about the proposals I'm signed on to. The other thing is prescription drugs. My dad has MS. He's 73 years old. He literally hasn't taken any medicine in almost 10 years. And it's because he can't afford it. I mean, it's like he basically looks at me and he's like, I know this sounds like a very raw cost-benefit analysis, but if I'm not going to stand up again and walk, I'm not going to pay for this treatment because it would bankrupt our family. And I think that is a conversation that, you know, is, we have to settle that right now. There's some very clear things that we can do right now while we're talking about these bold things to make people in a better position to afford their medicine. Thank you. Question?
John Espinosa from Senator Representative, and I really appreciate your service. I was wondering, do you support ranked choice voting? And if you do, could you reach out to the representatives that you know here to Coach Blosser?
Yes, so I'm sorry I missed the first part, but I had seen the presentation a couple of times. So I am a fan of ranked choice voting. I think, you know, that's a candidate who only won with 22% of the vote speaking. I would have liked that to have been more. I think ranked choice would have helped that. But, you know, certainly, you know, I don't think we're going to see the end of crowded primaries. And I think anything that we can do to really give voters confidence that, you know, you've got the candidate that everybody, or that the majority of people want is an important thing to do. So I know it's largely a state issue, so happy to talk to, and I'm sure you could even send me a list of those people that you want me to talk to.
Absolutely.
Great.
Hi, I'm Phil Willis. I'm former co-chair of the Concord Democratic Town Committee. I want to raise two burning issues. Not just your position, which my guess is probably 100%, but what you think you could do about them. One of them is the obscene way we're treating immigrants, especially the separation of children from their parents and then losing the information. And the other, as a grandparent, I want to make sure that there's an earth worth living in for our grandchildren, and that's very much in doubt while we're ignoring the subject.
Yeah, thank you, Phil. Those are two great questions. I haven't actually been to the border yet, but I am planning to go. I've got a lot of colleagues who represent border communities, and then I've got colleagues in California and Florida where there are these detention centers, and I know that there are congressional trips to go down and just see with our own eyes. It's appalling. These are going to be the darkest moments, I think, in our history when we look back at this at this time and how inhumanely we treated so many people who were actually coming to our border to ask for asylum. Right? I think people forget that the migration patterns have changed dramatically in the last 10, 15 years. And illegal border crossings are not Mexican single males anymore. They are families coming up from Central America in need of our help. And how we've handled that has just been a stain on our country's history. There are going to be a lot of hearings. I do not sit on a committee with jurisdiction, but a lot of my tough colleagues are on those committees, and I've seen the witness list and the panelist list of people who are going to be brought in. So I do think that there's going to be accountability for how we're treating families who are seeking asylum. I also think that we're going to be debating immigration reform. There's no question that we need there's the DREAM Act that is being worked on again, but I think that there's a real movement to have that be part of a much broader conversation on immigration reform. So, you know, I'm excited to be a party to that conversation. Like so many of you in this room, and my grandparents came from Brazil and Portugal, and I just want to reverse the mindset on how we're discussing immigrants in this country. Your second question on environment, It's probably the singular issue that we've just ignored in 2 years, with the largest consequence, because when you ignore climate change, you cause the biggest damage, right? I mean, we had to, now I think the bold goals that President Obama had set forth, we actually have to be twice as bold just to catch up, right? Because we don't need to read another UN report to tell us how dire the situation is. And so I think the Green New Deal is a terrific vehicle for us talking about the environment, for us getting serious about what that's going to mean in terms of legislation and planning. Sorry. Thank you. I had 2 minutes, right? 2? Okay.
I'm getting it for you.
I haven't, you know, I haven't. Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Christian Kruger. I was a previous candidate for state rep. I actually debated right before you did.
I remember.
And I'm currently the founder and chair of the Massachusetts Coalition Against Gerrymandering.
Yeah.
So I'm pretty interested in that field.
I know. Yeah. But there's a lot. Okay, ask your question. I'm sorry.
So for some reason, I get the impression that it's not going to make it through the Senate. But once we control the Senate and the presidency, I was wondering, do you think it's going to be as high of a priority, and are you going to be in front championing it to make sure that it actually gets through Congress?
Yeah, so there is a huge push. I mean, there's a record number of co-sponsors on H.R. 1. It probably has the most co-sponsors of any bill that we will put through in this Congress. So I think that it has incredible momentum to get through the House this week. The part that you care about is making sure that we have independent commissions overseeing our redistricting lines. In fact, I just filed an amendment last week because, you know, of course, even though you put together 75, bills into a package, there's always something missing, and one of those things missing was to make sure that someone like Paul Manafort or anybody who has a foreign interest, agent cannot sit on one of those independent redistricting commissions. So I do think that if H.R. 1 does not pass the Senate, we will be rolling off pieces of H.R. 1 and coming back through the House, through the Senate, to see where we can get the most bipartisan support. And so, gerrymandering is not just a Republican or a Democratic problem. And this is one of those things where it basically afflicts both parties. And so I do think that could be an area where John Sarbanes, who's kind of leading H.R. 1, will roll out the independent commission piece for redistricting and let that go as a separate bill to see if we can get it through both chambers.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Oh, thank you. Hi.
I'm Deb Busser.
I know.
I'm amazed at what you've accomplished in just 8 weeks. It's incredible.
Thank
One
you.
of the things that I do think is a huge issue for our country is income inequality, which you've already spoken about. And I know there are so many priorities, but I'm really curious as to where sort of tax reform stands based on things that have happened in the last couple of years. I think people are really feeling that right now.
Yeah.
So getting the taxes done, and I'd love to know sort of your opinion and sort of thoughts on when that can be.
Yeah. So I just did a labor breakfast maybe 2 weeks ago, and it was amazing how many folks came into that room with the complaint that they're getting from their members. Last year they got a little bit of a refund in their check. This year their normal refund has been cut in half. And so people are really feeling the impact of the tax cut from last year. There's a lot right now. I think, Ways and Means is working on a lot right now. One of them is they're dealing with this pressure around asking the president for his tax returns. And in every committee, I just want to point out, what makes Speaker Pelosi masterful is this ability to balance holding this administration accountable, which on every committee there is like a real push to, ask these questions, bring cabinet secretaries in, understand these policies that have basically just gone unchecked for 2 years. Course correct in a bunch of areas where we need to. In some committees, investigate, subpoena. I'll put that over here, Article 1. And over here, get things done. And that is what makes Nancy Pelosi the most experienced and the best person for this job, because that is a hard job. I mean, traversing that tricky terrain requires, a varsity, tested, proven leader. So I do think that tax reform is going to come. I think right now what people are working on are how do we start decreasing the cost structure for that's afflicting so many working and middle class families. And I do think that that's going to be part of the debate. It's, there's this feeling of trying to do everything all at once. There really is. I mean, we were all shot out of a cannon. I mean, after the shutdown ended, it was boom. And I think right now we're trying to sort of plan accordingly so that, the sequence matters right now in terms of building bipartisan support, getting things through the Senate, and pacing ourselves a little bit. So I think we want to get some of the maybe lower hanging fruit done so that then we can tackle some of those bigger things. But great question. I'm eager to recalibrate on the tax cuts.
Good afternoon.
Thank goodness you looked down.
My question is in regards to Social Security Administration.
Yes.
Will you or your colleagues have the right to request information from the Office of the Inspector General in regards to internet fraud on applications from hackers and what have you? Because they seem to be recalcitrant in providing the information. We know that it's going on.
That's a good question. Yeah, no, that's a great question. I'll have to look into that. I know that Social Security came up right out of the gate in January because Congressman Larson from Connecticut filed his Social Security Act for 2100, which is basically shoring up the Security Trust Fund, making sure that it's viable for the next 2100, next 180 years. And making sure that those benefits can expand, because we haven't seen an expansion of those benefits. But I'll look into that. I'm sure my team knows because you are in, and I will find out if we're working with the Inspector General on that. Thank you.
And I want to really quickly note, we could have 41 new Democratic House people if Dan McCready is racing right here.
I know, that's great.
Send him a few bucks.
Yeah, send him a few bucks.
My question to you is, we have a lot going on with healthcare, I know. There's a huge concern about mental health care.
Yeah.
Not only, it's been the poor stepchild, insurance companies trying not to cover it.
Yeah.
And even more so, a lot of people can't get mental health care because there simply isn't treatment. There aren't enough facilities, aren't enough providers available.
Yeah.
I wanted to know your thoughts on that.
Yeah, no, I think that is the reason why there is such a push, an energized push for universal health care, because the people who are getting hurt by the fact that it's not universal and it's not affordable are the people who need it the most. So, I know that Betsy wants to leave with a commitment from me today, because I know, I know, and I know that you would left the room just for a little bit, but for me, this is the reason for Medicare for All, right? To make sure folks with opioid addiction, making sure people with mental health issues, making sure that you know, people who are living in the gap have the health care that they deserve. You know, I wish this was next week because I would have afforded me, you know, the time. We're just, literally there were like 3 proposals that have dropped in terms of, you know, fixing this problem. And so I am committed to universal health care. I'm committed to affordable. It is because I hear the stories of people who are really living with that insecurity each day. So was there a sign-in sheet with your contact information? Because who knows, maybe we'll have this all resolved and I can make that promise to Betsy and to you. I really do see it as the details. We just want to get really crystal clear on the details. There haven't been that many bills that haven't been holdovers from the 115th Congress that have been 120 pages, so we're just ramping up on it, that's all. Thank you.
It's a pleasure. This is Catherine Lowe from Maynard.
Hi,
and I just wanted to tell you thank you so much for your support for the new Green Deal. Totally approved. So last September we heard you talk and we asked you if you'd be willing to sign the No Fossil Fuel Pledge. Yeah. And I haven't seen it to date. I have a feeling it's just because you've been so busy.
You know, I'm one of the few people, well, I shouldn't say few, relatively few, who just took the no corporate, I don't take corporate PAC money. So I've always figured that that's sort of subsumed in every other pledge because we don't take corporate PAC money, we never have.
I would still love to see your name on there just because I think it sends a message to other people.
Okay.
And I have
I'm sure you I'm happy to take your packet. Look, I joined the Sunlight movement in that getting off of fossil fuels and our dependency on fossil fuels and more toward clean and renewable energy. I am with that movement 100%. And frankly, the one that preceded that was, you know, getting money, especially dark money, out of our elections, which is why I don't take corporate PAC money. So I'm probably behind on a little bit of reading and a little bit of pledge signing, but just leave it with us and we'll take a look. Thanks.
I'm Shaw Yang in the Lisbon Acton area.
Hi.
Hi. So I just want to acknowledge that it was really good to have you here and listen to us.
Thank you.
Answer the questions. I really encourage you to do lots of these.
Yeah.
I mean, for me, just listening to for half an hour, I really got a lot more insights of, you know, what you're thinking, and that's really helpful. And I hope you heard a lot.
Oh yeah. No, this is more valuable to me, trust me, than it is for you. You know, I can't go on all your personal websites and see where what you care about. So town meetings and forums like this actually keep me very closely tethered to the people I represent. Great, so I'll be doing plenty of these.
We'll
In fact,
see you next month.
Yeah. I love Concord and Acton. No, I will say one thing. I mean, the one thing that was a little disheartening about January was we were supposed to be home for a district work period. We weren't able to come home because of the shutdown. Just so you know, my schedule is after that last vote, I come home. I make a beeline for the airport. I come home. I cover as much of the district as I possibly can when I'm home because I do think of the job here. I mean, look, all the votes that we take are very important in Washington. All the committee work that we do is really important, and we're going to introduce lots of legislation. I did go there to shake things up, and I fully intend to. But I know how effective and productive you can be when you're working your communities, whether that's on economic development, whether that's on, you know, working with community colleges to work with an employer to design programs to get a pipeline full of prospective employers into good paying jobs and doing the part locally to close that income inequality gap. I mean, that's really where I like to roll up my sleeves. So you'll see me here plenty. Thank you.
So we do just have time for one more question because the Congresswoman needs to leave. I'm not sure whose turn it is to pick it out. We just one more question.
Go ahead. Hi, Lori. My name is Judy Mayer. I'm from
Townsend. And I wanted to ask, since you are on the Education Committee, what you're going to do about the Secretary of Education.
That's terrific. I know, what I said I was going to do in the campaign, I actually can't do. No, I'm kidding. I do think that there's going to be hearings, and it will be around for-profit colleges, it will be around privatizing education, it will be everything that kind of falls out of the scope of what Congress has control or jurisdiction or accountability for that Secretary DeVos is able to instigate. You know, Chairman Scott hasn't told us when that hearing will be. I don't know if the Secretary will come in person or if she will send someone herself, but I know that there's a lot of people on that committee, a lot of freshmen on that committee who are really chomping at the bit for this administration to answer for the direction they've taken our education system. You know, that committee has been bustling. It's, you know, right out of the gate, you know, we did minimum wage, paycheck fairness, paid leave, and I'm missing one, and the school rebuilding. And we haven't even started yet. I mean, we're about to do the Higher Ed Reauthorization Act and so many others. So I think there's, I forget what this week is. It's something big. I can't believe I'm forgetting it, but I think it's labor related. But I know it's on the docket. So I look forward to that day as well. You only get 5 minutes to question a witness, which is, but you've seen how magnificently some of my colleagues have been using those 5 minutes. Thank you. Good. You know what, can we take one more? You had your hand up the whole day, and you just got, I don't know, you just got bypassed, but.
Hi, Congresswoman. My name is Molly Byron. I'm a member of the Boxborough Energy Committee and the Boxborough Democratic Town Committee.
Sure.
I know this gentleman already highlighted the issue, but earlier this year, my friend Eduardo Samaniego was actually deported to Mexico after being apprehended and detained for over 100 days.
Yeah.
He was a college student in Western Massachusetts at Hampshire, and a community organizer for the Pioneer Valley Worker Center. So my question for you is, beyond the crisis at the border, how can you plan to protect families who have been here in the country, the over 11 million undocumented immigrants that have been here for years, to keep families together here and, you know, prevent immigrants from the predatory practices of ICE, minimum bed mandates, everything that is just attacking humans and nonviolent good law-abiding systems.
Yeah, look, I have folks who worked on my campaign that attend Middlesex Community College, and they're dreamers, and they're, you know, they're really needing not just their protection, but also predictability, right? They don't know what their future holds right now, and it's really unsettling and devastating. I mean, what happened to your friend has happened across this district in cities like Lawrence and Lowell and Haverhill. The DREAM Act is going to be reintroduced this week, and I think that's going to prompt a debate, not just on protecting dreamers and extending DACA, but also protecting folks with TPS. I think that needs to be a part of a much broader comprehensive immigration reform package. But there's no question that we need to have tough discussions, right? An open debate around what our acceptance criteria is going to look like, how we're going to treat people who seek refuge in our country, how we're going to adjust our visa program so that we close the skills gap in this country, and you know, we need to have it. It's just so long overdue. I know that ICE right now is. It will be part of the FY20 DHS appropriations. You know, we had maybe a few wins, not as many. We were under the gun for the FY19, and for that, you know, the deal that had to be negotiated in those 2 weeks to keep the government open, we couldn't get everything we wanted in that bill. I mean, it wasn't ideal for Democrats, for sure. I mean, there was a lot more that, I think we wanted in terms of limiting the number of beds so that ICE can't detain as many folks, and just restructuring that agency overall. But we had to vote on that package because we had to move on, and we also know that within just the next couple of months we're going to be forced to debate this as part of the FY20 appropriations, and I think that's where we're going to be, looking at restructuring ICE, course correcting their many issues, and holding hearings to the effect of, where they're just overreaching.
Thank you so much, Congresswoman.
You're welcome. All right, thank you so much. So first of all, thank you. I thought you all came out for ranked choice, but I'm really happy you stayed. To the point that you made, these forums are really important. We intend to do lots of them, not just because it's good for you to kind of get the Washington update and what's on the horizon, but it's really helpful for me to get your thoughts as we debate some of the most important bills that, frankly, we should have been debating over the last few years. So I'm really thrilled that you all came out on a snowy day. I will say that if you're ever in Washington, please come visit us. We're at the Longworth Building, 1616. The wonderful thing, all the phone numbers stay the same from member to member, so however you contacted Nikki or Marty or Chet or anyone before that, contact me the same way. And then one other thing that wasn't mentioned, but we rely on activists in our districts to surface issues and surface things that maybe are local, whether it's, we just passed, for example, the Nashua River, keeping that scenic and wild designation that's so important in protecting our rivers, and that was something that Congresswoman Tsongas started, and I was able to, vote on, and those partnerships are so important. Not everyone feels comfortable. I don't get the sense that this is the group that I have to tell this to, but not everyone feels comfortable contacting their congressperson. But it really is a gift for us when you do, because I'm always surprised when I'm in close contact with constituents, with groups, the legislative opportunities, even the administrative opportunities that we're able to surface and really be productive on. So please stay in close contact with us. I look forward to serving you for the next 2 years. Thank you.
One second, please. Thank you to Congresswoman Trahan. We do have a couple of elected representatives who want to say a few words if people want to hang around. I just wanted to thank you for your dedication and your passion. You were the reason for the transformation.
Okay, representatives, State Representative Jen Benson, and we're going to hear from her for about 5 minutes. Jen Benson. Are you still here? She's coming. If everybody could maybe take a seat, because we're actually going to talk to State Representative Jen Benson for about 5 minutes. And then after State Representative Jen Benson, we're actually going to talk to State Representative Tammy Gouveia, and I just want to let everybody know that also Jamie Eldridge is here. All right. Do you want to go up on the stage? No? All right, here's Jen Benson. Thank you, Jen.
Hi, how are you? All right, so I know you're all looking to leave. So first of all, I have to thank everyone for coming here and listening and learning and figuring out what you can do to help us, because our job, we file legislation, but we need you to help us educate our colleagues about why it's important. So thank you for listening about ranked choice voting. I think this is brilliant. I was really excited to file the legislation, and so excited so many of my colleagues have signed on. So thank you. Please go out and help me educate other legislators about why this is important. I'll just highlight something else that I'm really looking for a lot of support on, and that's carbon pricing. We have been working for a couple sessions to develop a very strong, very progressive piece of legislation that is now being used by 18 other states as a model. And my hope is this is the session we will be able to pass this. And I heard a lot of questions about what we're doing about climate change, what we can do for our environment, and I think this is the #1 thing we can do. There's lots of important things to do, but when you talk to environmentalists, economists, this seems to be the thing that everyone is grabbing onto. So I hope you will look into this bill and help me support this bill, because it is critically important. And I used to say for my kids, I have 3 kids, I don't say that anymore. It's important for us. You know, we are running out of time. And so it is so critical for all of us to have a voice and speak together about the importance of climate change. And I hope you will join me not only in supporting this legislation in order to get it passed, but that you will make this a top issue for every candidate running for president in 2020. Thank you.
Thank you for staying for a few extra minutes to hear from both Rep. Benson and myself. It's really a pleasure. So, just like the Congresswoman, it's been like drinking from a fire hose for the first month and a half or 2 months that I've been in this position. It's the first time I was sworn in as the state representative for the 14th Middlesex District. Very proud of having been sworn in as your representative. So the first 2 weeks were filled with filing legislation. I filed 19 pieces of legislation ranging from climate change to fentanyl to addressing childhood trauma to voting access. And then I signed on as a co-sponsor of over 300 bills, including ranked choice voting, tons of climate change related policies, things that I talked a lot about on the campaign trail, things that I heard from all of you over and over and over again about what's really important. Healthcare, transportation, we really need to address the transportation crisis that we're facing in addition to the climate crisis. So that comprised really my first month, in addition to standing up for transparency, both in not voting for the speaker and also in standing up and saying we need to have some rules changes on January 30th when we took up the rules debate. So I'm very proud of having stood up for those. I know that there are a lot of people who are asking questions about, well, what does that really mean and why does it impact us? It impacts us because there are really important bills that did not get to the floor for us to take up and vote on last legislative session. I'm proud to report that I was assigned to 4 really great committees. Committee on Mental Health, Substance Use and Recovery, which really is in my wheelhouse. I spent a good 15 years as a public health social worker working on the opioid crisis. So I'm really happy to be part of that committee. I also was assigned to the Joint Committee on Families, Children, Families, and Persons with Disability. And the hearing, first hearing, I'm so excited, is happening on Tuesday. We are taking up Lift the Cap on Kids and banning conversion therapy, which were really important. They did not pass last year. They didn't get to the floor for a vote. Really hoping that we can push those forward this year. The other 2 committees I was assigned to was export development, which really impacts our economy and our ability to trade with other countries. And then the 4th is consumer protection and professional licensure. So I get to be a little bit of a Liz Warren up at the State House, which I'm really excited about. So that's the first committee that I've been notified that a hearing is occurring. Really looking forward to digging in, diving in really deep into a lot of really important issues. I can stick around, answer any questions that you have. Hopefully I've covered enough of what you would hope to hear from me, and I don't know who to turn this over to right now. And I can't sing, so I won't do that. I can tell jokes.